Hi, I'm Anna Marie Cox. I've covered American politics and culture for places like MTV, The New York Times, GQ, and Harper's. My cats are named after Luke and Leia Skywalker.
And I'm Dan Dresner. I'm a professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and the author of a textbook called Theories of International Politics and Zombies.
This is a real textbook that he teaches from.
We are nerds who nerds think are nerdy. We love talking about political theory and science fiction, and that's what this podcast is about. For now, we're recapping and talking through the history, the economics, and the class politics of The Expanse, Season 5.
We will do something else after this. We are looking for suggestions as to what. If you have a suggestion, you can get in touch with us via Instagram or Twitter at the same handle, which is @_SpaceTheNation. You can also go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/SpaceTheNation. You can sign up to give us money in exchange for things. But it's okay if you don't. We know times are hard. Dan, do you know where else times are hard?
Things are tough all over the system, Anna, at least on The Expanse. Whether you look at Mars, the Belt, Earth, this is a very, very depressing and rather startling episode. And
it is called Mother, so I find that unsurprising. But that says more about me than anything else. Dan, would you please lead us off with a recap?
Okay, so a lot happens in this episode. Let us start with Palace Station, in which Naomi arrives seeking out Philip. She manages to reunite with her old crew from Palace Station, who also happens to clearly be Philip's crew that we saw back in episode 1. She puts out the word that she wants to talk to Philip, and Philip does show up in the bar. She tries to talk with him. It does not go well. She tries to warn him about Marco, his father, offers him a ship, the freighter that she arrived in. Philip literally says "fuck you" to her, leaves, and then, however, Naomi goes back to the ship, and lo and behold, Philip arrives. Just as Naomi thinks that maybe something, more pleasant is about to happen, Philip's crew also arrives. They take the ship, and they also decide to take her, which clearly surprises Philip's crew, but they are basically absconding and kidnapping Naomi.
Naomi is out of her depth. That is actually perhaps a sub-theme of this episode, being out of one's depth.
Yes, I would agree. Although I will say now, in retrospect, she was right in episode 1 about Holden not coming. I don't think he would have helped. I think he would have probably made everything worse. So to be fair, like at the time when Naomi says, "I don't want you to come," I wasn't sure why. And now having seen episode 3, you know what? That was the one thing I think she was right about during this episode.
Yeah, he's out of his depth in a different place.
Exactly.
In this episode.
Yes. So anyway, that's what's going on there.
Which is actually next stop.
Yes, we go to Tycho Station, in which we discover that Monica thankfully has survived, but informs Fred that his organization leaks like a sieve. Basically, lets Fred and Holden know that someone, a Belter strike force, has seized a Martian scientist to potentially do protomolecule research, and then the search is on for Monica's kidnappers. They find 2 dead freight guys, is literally what I wrote down. But Belters, yes. But they are obviously dead, which means whoever actually did kidnap Monica is trying to clean up their tracks. They also set up a trap for a freighter coming in from Ceres to pick up the container that Monica was ostensibly trapped in, and presumably the freighter pilots do not know that Monica is no longer in the container. We do not know whether this plan will work. That will, I take it, happen in episode 4.
Oh, and I guess I'll introduce the next thing that we're doing, which was going to Luna, a very, very important plot point that is kind of underplayed a little as far as like emotional weight, I feel like, but
Yeah, I mean,
there's a lot going on emotionally in this episode, I feel like. And we can talk more about that later.
No, in some ways
I think the balancing act they're doing here is really tough.
Yes.
Really, really tough.
I want to get to this later, but also I loved all the bar scenes in this episode. There is a lot of bar scenes, and the contrast with the different bars are really interesting. In the case of Luna, Avasarala and her admiral sidekick bring in another sort of private sector scientist to try to figure out what all those asteroid fragments that were orbiting around Venus are. They figure out that perhaps what this could be is an asteroid that had broken up, but that was covered in Martian stealth tech that Marco Inaros was throwing at Earth. Avasarala wants to retask all of the watchtowers that are normally focused on Mars to detect stealth tech to start looking for asteroids. Admiral Delgado, who is her sidekick, is resistant to this, but nonetheless tries to go up the chain of command to do this, is shot down and makes it very clear to Avasarala that he has gone as far as he can. Avasarala, meanwhile, tries to reach out a little bit to Arjun, and is now convinced that Marco Inaros is plotting to essentially get an asteroid launched onto Earth based on intel that she receives, which we'll talk a little bit later. But in some ways is feeling clearly very hamstrung because, as we'll talk about a little bit later, in some ways Avasarala now is kind of like Winston Churchill circa 1935, which is to say that she's powerful, she's pretty perceptive, but she has made too many mistakes and does not have a great deal of power, and so is limited in terms of what she can do.
Yeah, it is a tough season for Avasarala. Yeah. And I've been trying to read something into her wardrobe.
Oh, okay. No, this is literally something I
don't know if there's anything there. Like, that's my attempt, because I felt like before there was kind of subtle signals sent by what she wears. But now I'm not so sure. Yes, definitely bookmark drinking. Yeah. Definitely want to talk about the bars and the drinking.
We will talk about the drinking.
And now to another incredibly important plot point that has a weird emotional resonance. I groaned so hard during the entire Mars.
Okay.
Nonsense. It's just nonsense.
Okay, so we clearly need to talk about this, but essentially in the Mars scene, Alex is finally going to drink with the Martian lieutenant working for Admiral Sauveterre. I literally wrote in my notes, Emily Babbage has come to play. By which I mean, we are no longer seeing Lieutenant Babbage, rather her hair is down. She is clearly in Mata Hari mode, gets Alex.
I wrote in my notes, Martian Mata Hari.
There we go, yeah. She gets Alex pretty good and drunk, in which point Alex spills a lot of the beans about what happens on Ilus. Not all of them, though, to be fair. Gets a little information from Babbage in return, namely that Babbage is about to head out on a supply run. On his way back to his apartment is jumped by two low-level goons who inject him with something and are about to kill him after interrogating him. Bobby thankfully opens the door just in the right moment, and Bobby comes in and Bobby does Bobby things. Punching the two goons, dispatching them with relative ease by Bobby standards, has them arrested by the Martian police, but
does not kill them. Actually, I want to point out does not kill them, because I think this is important.
Yes.
Because if they get off in some way, they can carry the intel back.
This is true. Yes.
I feel like she should have offed them.
Well,
I feel like she should have offed them. Right. I know that's morally questionable, but
the other thing that I was puzzled by with this scene in terms of the way it was edited, which is she dispatches Goon 1, and then in Goon 2 she injects the thing that the Goon was trying to inject into her, which I'm assuming was some form of truth serum. And then it cuts to the Martian authorities being there. So the thing I kept wondering was, why didn't Bobby and Alex interrogate the goon to find out what the heck was going on?
Yeah, I think there are places here throughout the episode where we see people out of their depth.
Yes, that's fair.
Just doing stuff that they're not good at. Alex is an amazing pilot. He's so good at being a pilot. But he is not good at being a spy.
He's bad at spy stuff. Yes, he's not good at spy stuff. No,
and just not thinking things through. Holden also not good at this stuff about security and mysteries. And he's just a good guy. That's what he needs to be doing, is being a good guy. And I think Drummer is also weirdly shows some lack of
Drummer,
good decision making.
Maybe Drummer is a little. We'll get to Drummer because that's actually a good segue to talk about Drummer. So we get to Drummer. Who they find Ashford's ship, the Tynan. She also finds Ashford's last message, which Ashford had recorded his conversation with Marco Inaros, which makes it pretty clear what Marco Inaros' plan is, which is to launch stealth tech covered asteroids at Earth. Drummer, after reviving the Tynan and essentially resalvaging it, wants to go after Marco and collect the bounty that the OPA has put on him. It is safe to say her crew is not keen on this. But she seems to be talked out of it by Oksana, who...
and we finally get space polyamory,
yes.
But I will say, as with much of this series, what I appreciate is the frankness and matter-of-factness with which they treat all different kinds of sexual orientations, and activity, and also the fact that it's just another thing.
Yeah.
We both watched some of the after show interviews, and the series creators on Twitter especially actually have complained about people creating romantic tension where there is none. They want to make very clear, there are completely pure platonic relationships,
yes,
and those are great.
Yes.
And there are partnerships, and those are great, and none of them are more important than one another. I don't know, I find that refreshing.
No, that's true, and I think I think specifically the response was to somehow people thinking that Alex and Bobby were going to do something when in fact Alex is very clear when he's interested in someone and not interested in someone, and he's clearly not he likes Alex or likes Bobby, but not in that way. And certainly, God knows it's reciprocal, so not a problem. Anyway, Drummer's last act is to send Ashford's message on to Fred Johnson, who then passes it on to Avasarala. But the point being, and closes with her saying, "This is no longer my fight," or "This is not my fight." And then, unfortunately, the episode ends with what I can only describe as the Big Bang, or the Expanse's effort to make deep impact, because the asteroid hits, and clearly we are about to see bad things happening. The way I would put it is that I am not normally a binge watcher of shows. I'm not, I normally ration out. I'll watch an episode or two a night, and then I'll keep going. It required a tremendous amount of willpower not to click on to episode 4 immediately after the end of this episode.
I had the same response, and even having read the books, I am really interested in how they play this out. And I'll say here what I couldn't say before, because it would have been a spoiler. When I was reading the books, the entire time I was like, there's no way they're actually going to destroy Earth. I mean, come on. Earth is the good guy, or Earth is this incredibly, it's us, Most science fiction movies, plots, comic books, whatever, you're always saving Earth, right? That's the usual arc of any time Earth is in peril. To actually kill Earth off, like a beloved character.
Dare I say, I guess the question is this episode, and I guess the next one, the Red Wedding episode, as it were, of The Expanse?
That's actually a good comparison, because it's like them doing something that's conceivable, but yet startling.
Yes.
Right?
And of course, it's worth noting, by the way, that the main character who does not appear in this episode, who I am very worried about now, is Amos. Because we knew Amos was going to be visiting someone, and I'm kind of curious where Amos is and what happened. Yeah,
this is a very fun plot.
Okay.
I will give a teaser with that. It's a really cool adventure / emotional journey again.
Okay.
For Amos.
I look forward to that. But we should focus back on this episode.
Yes, we should. And in the past, we have deconstructed episodes by going through our favorite quotes. We're going to do a little different this time. We're not going to separate quotes and scenes. We're kind of using the quotes to get into scenes. I don't know why I'm explaining this on our third episode. It's not like people are really used to a certain kind of structure, but I thought I would explain. So we are now going to enter into a section that I have now decided to call pivotal scenes.
Our first quote, it literally is how the episode opens, which is in the bar in Luna, in which Avasarala and Admiral Delgado talk to Dr. Alawi, who is a private sector scientist.
If he takes my call at all, and if the SG gets wind of it...
I have burned all the bridges in front of me and behind me. And I don't give a fuck. That's a lovely antique.
Yeah, I like mechanisms.
So I've heard.
This is your quote, but I just want to say, I kept in the "so I've heard" because it was so weird. There's some stuff that's mystifying to me about Admiral Delgado. I don't quite get him. Mm-hmm. It's a good enough actor that I don't question what's happening with him, right. But he seems to kind of be a little all over the place. And
so
what the fuck?
There are two things.
Anyway.
There are two things about this scene. I mean, really, this is not necessarily emblematic of anything larger. There were two things I thought about the scene. First was I want to know the end of that goddamn joke.
Yes, I had the same thing. I was going to ask you if is that like a military theory joke that like
not to my knowledge. I admit I'm not a I'm not that. I've
military strategy joke, war college joke. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it wouldn't shock me, but like if it is, I don't know it. And the other thing, like literally the I like mechanisms line. It's not necessarily emblematic of anything else in the entire episode. It was just, again, props to the Expanse writers, because this is a character that we see for one scene. He has maybe 2 or 3 minutes of screen time, if that, and is mostly sort of doing sort of, tech exposition or laying pipe, as it were. And yet that was just like a 2-second thing that just sort of added a slight kind of depth to the character that otherwise wouldn't necessarily have existed. And it was, I just, again, it's a lovely grace note, which I really liked.
Yeah, it also shows a little bit of how the Expanse brings our reference points into the future and recontextualizes them.
Yes, and does so in a way that
can't.
And does so in a way that doesn't make you. It doesn't just comfort you. It properly sets you. It sort of grounds you in the right way.
This is not the homecoming I was expecting.
Well, you're not a homebody.
You need to wake the fuck up. You have got a serious problem on your hands. Someone is after the proto-molecule and you know where it is.
So that last one from Monica, as a journalist, I want to protest her treatment.
They saved her life. What are you so upset about?
They literally slam the door on her as she is pointing out her importance to this whole venture. Like, clearly, respect for the press has not increased in the 400 years or so that has
Fair
followed.
enough. So here's my question.
Fake press, like, blame and shame.
Yeah, well, I guess the way I would put it is, would Monica have actually shared that information without, like, already getting a quid pro quo or something from, like, wouldn't a reporter said, I'll give this to you, but I need to know something in return?
If I thought the fate of humanity
there you go.
was at stake, maybe I'm a bad journalist, but if I
but
thought...
you're a good person, Ella.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know. I mean, you picked up on these as plot points. I'll go ahead and just say what I think, which is that, of course, there's the Alex one, which is funny, but also it's the out of their depth.
Out of context, yeah.
Out of context stuff. Yeah, we should say, you know what, that's better, because that's the Amos line
right,
from
exactly.
First episode. He's like, I'm in a different context. Everyone's in a different context so far in this series. And I think that's going to remain unless they start picking up other books. But as long as the Rossi crew is spread to the winds, I think everyone's out of context.
Yeah, that's a safe statement.
So the Alex thing, Alex is out of context. Also, that lack of context, or that lack of experience in this particular kind of work, is important here.
Yes,
like the fate of what's going to happen next, obviously. So,
and the other thing I think is that the wake the fuck up quote is again doubling down, and they're not being subtle in signaling this, which is that there's clearly trouble in Tycho, and that there's big trouble in little Tycho, as it were, and Fred needs to get a grip on what the hell is going on there.
Indeed. All right. And now from the cringiest scene ever filmed for The Expanse in all of the seasons and all of the episodes they have had thus far. This is from the exchange between Alex and Martian Mata Hari.
Yeah, if it wasn't for Miller, we'd all be dead on that rock. But lucky for everyone, we destroyed that last piece of proto-molecule crap. So now all those machines on all those other planets, they're going to remain inert.
The most amazing thing about that story might just be your modesty.
All right. So
Anna, I have a question for you, which is, why did you find that scene so discomforting?
Well, I am perhaps overly sensitive to people embarrassing themselves. I don't know. Like, I hate to watch stuff where people make fools of themselves, and Alex is making a fool of himself. And it's just such ham-fisted fake seduction. Like,
right, that was what I thought.
Again,
that was the thing I thought you found was just like, is it because Babbage is just lathering it on,
and he should. Well, I mean, he's being a man, I guess. Like, I'm always kind of surprised when men fall for shit like that. Like,
oh, Anna,
I know I shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I've been on this earth for 47 years and never seen a man not fall for it. Again,
we have our strengths, but on this, we are very simple creatures.
Things that have not changed.
I will say this, which is, to be fair to Alex, again, he does all of this really badly, but at the very end, you remember, like in the scene with after the cops have left, Bobby asks him what he's learned, and he does say, "Well, I've learned Babbage isn't really into me."
He redeems himself just a little bit in that.
But yes,
when his reports
right,
back,
but I will put
and it sounds like he's a little more savvy than he seemed at the moment. But
yes, but I agree with you that even going in, what was astonishing to me was just how bad he was at trying to gather information. I'm like, no, you don't spill your guts and then after you've gotten loaded.
Yeah, I know. That was the part that I laughed at that too. It's like he tells the entire story of Illis and then it's like, so how about your boss?
With the 2 minutes that we're about to leave, let's talk about Sauveterre. And I actually, this was the one subtle thing about Babbage that I like, which was when she sort of, acted like hurt and jealous. He's like, oh, you seem more interested in my boss than me, and which I actually thought was clever.
And this is probably the least political analysis we've done of an episode so far. Like, this episode seems to have like the least IR, perhaps sort of balancing out the really heavy-handed actual War College lecture from the last episode. I did want to ask you, as someone who's spoken at War Colleges, do they teach that stuff at War College? Like the whole like Mata Hari stuff? Like, is that...
No, I think it is safe.
Class?
No. Yeah. There is no introduction to Mata Hari or resisting Mata Hari. That is not... And in some ways, this goes back to the odd aspect of the last episode where Sauveterre is lecturing about the futility of planning, because planning and strategy is what they lecture about at war colleges. At war colleges, you're dealing with higher level officers, majors, captains and so forth, depending on the commodores, you name it. And it's all about like sort of larger strategic thinking. And no, it's not about how to resist a comely lieutenant.
Maybe they teach that in like SEAL training.
Yeah, exactly. That I would assume they do there. But no, it's safe to say this is not. But, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to allow you to introduce the drummer stuff,
yes,
because I know how dear she is to you.
Yes, as my favorite character on the show, Kamina Drummer is going through some stuff in this episode. And in the scenes we're about to see, essentially, it was actually, this was actually the most, to the extent that there was a payoff in this episode, this was it for me, in the sense of, I actually thought Drummer is the only character that actually finds even a modicum of peace in terms of what happens in this episode.
If I wanted company, I'd have stayed in bed.
We never realize how much someone is a part of us until we feel the weight of emptiness when they're gone. You haven't had a family in a long time. You don't have to hide your grief from me or from anyone. Not anymore.
So I really love that scene for a variety of reasons. One of which is it's actually, we have only, for both political science and for character reasons. For character reasons is that we see Drummer actually letting down her guard, which is not something she does. She's barely done at all throughout the entire arc of the show. And in some ways it's interesting because really we knew that Drummer was OPA, and had been a pirate, but like we've only seen her in institutional roles, and like now we're finally sort of seeing her a little bit more personally. But the poli-sci reason I like this is that in some ways this is the distinction between what we would call, Drummer as a Weberian bureaucratic actor versus a more clannish actor. So think about it. The reason that Drummer, we've primarily seen Drummer as buttoned down and like as a hard ass for, the first 3 seasons of this show is that we only see her in an institutional capacity of, literally state building. Now that she is the head of her own, factional politics are much more, sort of family and clan based. And so I actually liked Oksana's point of you actually lead better by letting your guard down as opposed to trying to, put up a front of some kind. And so it's funny, we in political science normally thinks of sort of the Weberian bureaucratic state as a superior form of organization to kind of clan forms. And I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that, but the interesting thing about this episode is just that maybe for Drummer right now, being part of a faction is a little bit better for her mental headspace because she has clearly been and that's the other thing that I found in this entire episode was that she's just clearly racked with guilt because in some ways she betrayed Ashford twice, right? First she votes to in season 4. First she vote.
You can see it if you look in this larger perspective of what she how important is her relationship to Ashford. That's what she's now being asked, right?
Yeah.
Do you choose us or do you choose this relationship that was once important to you, but that you made a rational decision about? I guess I'm just rejecting betrayed because I think even Ashford understood what Drummer was doing.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's put it this way. Betrayed is the wrong word, and I apologize for that. It would be more to say that...
I mean, it's just, it's a complicated, but I think it's more complicated than betrayed.
No, that's correct. But the point is, Drummer makes 2 decisions that conflict with what Ashford wanted. First, she agreed to let Marco free when they had captured him, and Ashford said he's dangerous. And then second, rejects Ashford's offer to be his XO in hunting for Marco. And it is clear that in Drummer's mind, she is responsible for Ashford's death, whether that is accurate or not. And I think Oksana really does a lovely job here of sort of pointing out the ways in which that's not necessarily the case. The one thing I would say, and I'm curious about your thoughts about this, is that the sort of final scene we see Drummer where she's somewhat, she says, "This is not my fight." She takes the bottle out that she had given to Ashford that they would drink to celebrate Marco's death, opens it up, and I think, okay, she's moving on, but then she closes it again and does not drink. So I do not think she has quite moved on yet.
I think that she retains complicated ties to the OPA as a nation-state building project.
Right.
Versus the clan politics.
Yes.
That she's involved in now. And I actually hadn't realized this till you were unpacking it in the Weberian versus clan structure, which is I kept seeing a theme in this episode of class over material. Class politics and family politics being stronger than money.
Ah, okay. Which actually leads us to, I believe, the next quote.
That is correct. And I'll just to be really obvious here, Drummer is making a choice to forego the insane amount of bounty on Marco's head and instead be a part of the family, to strengthen those ties rather than to simply get rich.
Yes.
And I have a couple of quotes that also illustrate that. One of them is a little long, but there's a lot there.
I mean no disrespect. I know it's hard times around here.
Fuck it, you know about hard times.
I worked in the refinery a long time ago.
So yeah, we used to work in refinery too. Not long ago.
Fucking ring. Oh, the job go right back down the weller for the Ingers.
Let me buy you both around.
That all you think we worth, okay?
How about you buying us 100 rounds?
And then the next one is a much more succinct expression of the same idea.
The ship that I came in on, I bought it for you. I'm giving it to you. Take it and go wherever you want, and when you get there, I will send you all the money that you need, but please just take it.
Fuck you.
So So actually, what I really liked about this episode in terms of the Naomi scenes was in some ways that first scene in which it's just two belters sort of, trying to cadge her, in some ways was the harbinger of this is not going to go well, because it shows Naomi had no idea how to deal with these two. She's clearly, you're right, she's somewhat at a much better place than she was when she was originally at Palace Station. They are guilting the hell out of her, and her response is basically just to appease them. And, if not for the arrival of one of her old friends, whose name I believe is Sin.
Yes,
which is a good name. Nicely done. She would have been in further trouble. And it demonstrated the degree to which she was out of her depth.
Out of context, out of depth. And again, I am very interested in how this show treats class and treats materialism, like it's Marxism to the degree that it is obvious. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And I just felt like the choices being made here were really interesting to say that there are some drives that are stronger than the profit motive.
Right. Absolutely. Although, again, this is... The one thing I will say about the scene between Naomi and Philip, the first scene in the bar, was it does show the extent to which Naomi was out of her depth, because I even as someone, maybe this is the effect of being married to a therapist and a social worker, but I was like, this is not what you say to your estranged son to convince your estranged son to walk away from his father. All I kept thinking was, there are so many better things you could have said at that moment.
I had the same kind of response, by the way, and not to get too personal, but I alluded to it. I had a complicated relationship with my mother. And actually, because I want to talk about recovery when we talk about bars.
Oh, there we go.
My mom was an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. For a long time, we were both alcoholics at the same time. Yeah. It was easy for me to relate to this scene. It was easy for me to kind of put myself in the place of someone who had to think about what I would be doing if suddenly things were either okay, if suddenly she wanted things to be okay.
Right. No, I guess the way I would put it, I wasn't expecting to sympathize with Philip at the end of that scene. And that's what I did. That's the way I would put it.
And I think they did that well. Yeah. And I think it shows, Naomi, for all her incredible strengths, she did miss a part of somehow the emotional maturity that comes with being a mother, maybe. Yeah. And it also made me question, and maybe this is the thing that I bring to this, but when she says, I love you and I've always loved you or something like that, part of me was like, really?
Yeah, it's
I mean, I know the bond between mother and child is incredibly strong, and there's something that's actually chemical about it, right? Love is an action.
Right.
She has given Philip no evidence that she loves him.
And furthermore, goes on to say, by the way, the person who has raised you and is a charismatic person and loves you, is not who you think he is, which is accurate, but nonetheless, you don't lead with that. It's not, that is something you can only get to after, quite some time. So yeah, as I said, it was a well-executed, if the point was to make you feel sympathy for Philip, then mission accomplished, because, let's face it, we shouldn't be feeling all that much sympathy for the Inaris faction, given what they're about to do. But yeah, it was striking to me the degree to which Naomi, despite the fact that she had been in Palace Station before, was clearly way out of context here.
Yeah. All right. So another person who's operating in a space she's not used to.
Yes. So, Avasarala is just trying to figure out how to stay in the scene. She clearly thinks there is a serious threat. She thinks that Nancy Gao and the UN have to be alerted to this, but she is no longer the formidable political force that she once was, and she at least recognizes that now. Except she does give a fuck. She's clearly frustrated. She is been reduced in terms of her power and stature. Her own, she literally tells Delgado later in the episode that he is her only ally. So she's simultaneously finding out pertinent information and yet is being shut out. And again, to revive, I was struck by, historically, the analogy is to Churchill, because Churchill in the mid-1930s, before becoming prime minister again, is someone who has a long record and also a fairly long record of fuck-ups, too. Had made a number of disastrous policy decisions or policy pronouncements when he had previously held authority.
And was unliked by a lot of people.
Exactly, and was a polarizing figure. It took...
Who was also right.
Yes, who it turns out was right about the most important thing in his lifetime. And so that, in some ways, again, it does... and also was clearly charismatic and loquacious and all of those things. So, I would, this way, in my fantasy, if there was a holodeck on The Expanse, I want to see Avasarala and Churchill, at a drinking session.
Oh, God, that's such a smooth segue to drinking.
Right.
So I'll let you go with the upside of drinking, and you wanted to talk about the bars.
Well, it was just, it struck me that, this had to have been intentional. There are 3 major sequences that happen in bars. I mean, admittedly, The Expanse is not shy about drinking. There's oftentimes some drinking. But it was striking to me how the degree to which you see, it opens with the bar in Luna in which they're, I think, having whiskey. It then cuts to Palace Station.
Oh, and a martini, which he at first shakes too violently, I think, for her. He shakes
That's right.
it more.
And then it cuts to Palace Station where they're just drinking vodka. And this was my favorite, I have to admit, was the Martian bar with the cringe Mata Hari scene. But the thing I loved was, we'll have the private reserve wine, which I have to admit, I was not expecting Mars to be to have a wine bar, as well as the old, the cowboy bar we'd seen previously. But in some ways, I think what it actually connects to is the class overtones that you were talking about, because the Luna bar is relatively upscale. They're alone because they're just trying to interrogate. The Palace Station bar is a dive bar, and the Mars one is sort of a fancy restaurant type. It would be a place where you would take a war college person out.
It was a very date,
yes,
type bar
exactly.
too. And I don't. So
I'm curious about your perspective on this as a
recovering alcoholic. Yes. I want to put out there that drinking is awesome for people that can do it. I have no if you are someone that can drink and then stop, then you should by all means have fun. That is great. But as someone who's always a little aware of drinking as a plot device, it's very obvious in this episode, number one. And number two, it made me think of something that I often ponder when I'm watching science fiction taking place in the far future, which is, what do people in recovery do?
That's an excellent question. I hadn't thought about that. Because,
is there AA in space?
You would think there would have to be, right? I mean, that there's no... You're right. That would be interesting. I'm trying to think in science fiction if there has ever been a recovering substance abuser. I mean, there is in fantasy.
I can't think of one. There's often people with drug or alcohol problems, but they tend not to get sober. And it's portrayed in... I'm not going to say ungenerous, but it's usually a character defect. It's presented as a weakness of
right,
someone.
It's a sign that the character is going to turn on someone or
is bad or weak or somehow damaged in some way and not a disease. So one thought I had is that it doesn't exist anymore. They've cured addiction.
They've cured the gene?
Which,
yes.
They've cured the gene because there is a lot of evidence that it is a genetic disposition and that if they have amazing gene therapy in the future and they have a lot of different kinds of cool things, they've cured cancer, or they've figured out how to, not have cancer be deadly.
Right.
I don't know. I phrased that very badly, but they figured out how to stop cancer.
Right. If they can cure diseases that we think of that have traditionally been accepted as diseases, surely perhaps they have attacked diseases that are now being appreciated as actual diseases.
But I really would love it if the Expanse would tackle addiction in space. Like, I just think that would be really interesting, because A has been around for like 70 something years and mostly remain unchanged. Like, that's something that is a key part of the program, is that it doesn't change very much. There's a strong resistance to changing anything in what's called the basic text. Right. So the basic text is all him, he, man, husband.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And like, I go to a women's meeting where we just read it different. Like, just wherever it says man, we say woman. Yeah. Like, wherever it says him for God, we usually just replace it with God rather than he, him, whatever. So anyway, hey, shout out Expanse writers. If you wanted to do something interesting, would be cool to address.
I have to say, I'm intrigued by the notion that the AA liturgy is more rigid than like actual religious liturgy. Because like in the time that I've grown up, as a conservative Jew, like the prayers that we say now have become much more gender neutral than when I was a kid. So like if the all I'm saying is that if like a 5,000-year-old religion can change, then maybe the AA liturgy can as well.
This year, for obvious reasons, it has become a much bigger discussion to bring AA into this century. Yeah. There's also a lot of talk about the whiteness of AA and the classness of AA, and it would just be really cool, to see how these thinkers who have been so imaginative and expansive, as it were, in projecting out what human culture looks like and how it changes and doesn't change. I just love to see that. And speaking of not changing, on the back of the door in Alex's hotel room, there's a framed piece of paper showing the exit routes. I that's the best they could do. 400 years from now is the exact same thing.
Okay, you know what?
That's also ignored.
I'm gonna no, I will defend this. All right, here's where I will go. You see books in the Expanse, like actual physical books. Okay. The book is an awesome piece of technology, that is very, very old. I'm not saying I'm therefore not equating them with hotel maps, but all I would say is that if there was an actual crisis, maybe having a thing literally right at the door is the one way that like
that's
stupid
true.
people.
It's something that's not electronic that won't go down.
And also everyone is panicked and so forth. So that's all. All I'm saying is I'm not saying that they're like the greatest things ever, but there's a logic to keeping them there.
Okay. Next piece of technology that survived 400 years, and I dare you to defend. As you know, this is a pet peeve of mine throughout this series, but now I finally get a chance to talk about it. QWERTY keyboards. Seriously? Like, they have these amazing, like, handhelds, and I'm actually, like, the handhelds thing, I can see how that format for personal technology is the way to go still. Yeah. Like, when it's been imagined that people have, like, wrist stuff or whatever, like, I do think that humans, to have a thing that you hold in your hands to communicate is a natural thing. Also,
the key thing is that if you hold it in your hand, you can also put it away, which you can't really do with your wrist then. Right.
However, like, there's a scene, I think it's in the first episode, where someone, like, is shown dramatically typing on their handheld. As a journalist who types a lot, sometimes dramatically.
I'm going to want to see a GIF of you typing dramatically, but keep going.
It is it's impossible to convey the drama of dramatic typing. Dramatic typing looks like regular typing unless there's suspenseful music behind it. I don't play suspenseful music when I'm doing my dramatic typing, so it would look like any other typing. Okay, Dan, explain to me. Like, you said there's actually a concept related to
there is a social science concept. So first of all, your objection to QWERTY is that it's an inefficient keyboard, I'm assuming? Okay, yes. Fair enough.
Yes.
So it will behoove you to know that, in fact, QWERTY was designed to be an inefficient keyboard. This is the fun thing about it. So When QWERTY was originally designed, and this is one of the most well-known articles in economic history, which is written by an economist named Paul David about QWERTY and a concept called path dependence. So essentially, the QWERTY keyboard, when it was designed, was for typewriters. Now, if you recall, you are old enough, and I am old enough to remember, that back in the days of before computers, when you were typing something, you didn't want to make a mistake, because if you made a mistake with an old typewriter, you would either have to start over completely or get something called whiteout or some other substance to...
Correction tape, which was even like more annoying.
Right, exactly. So the point was, there was a danger in going too fast. You actually wanted to be able to go in such a way that you didn't make mistakes, because that was, if you typed fast but kept making mistakes, that was far more costly. So the original keyboard, there were other keyboards when the typewriter was originally developed that were far more efficient. But QWERTY, it was thought, would slow typists down to the point where the mistake rate would be less. And so QWERTY winds up becoming the standard keyboard. And this is where the concept of path dependence kicks in. Path dependence is a concept that economists talk about, and political scientists and social scientists, which basically says, if you do something at time t plus 1, it becomes harder to change. At time t plus 2, it becomes even harder to change, and so forth. And part of this, in terms of the QWERTY keyboard, is that in order to be trained into typing, everyone has to learn the same keyboard. That way I can type on one computer and then move to another computer or move to another typewriter, so on and so forth. We don't need to relearn it. To ask people to change QWERTY, there are massive switching costs to that, because you are basically telling people who have typed, literally touch typed for, decades, and now don't even think about it. They just have muscle memory. If you change the keys on them now, that will be massively disorienting to them. And so you would trigger tremendous opposition. And so there are ways in which what path dependence says is that history matters, that if you start off on an inefficient path for whatever reason, you are often stuck with that path, even if everyone recognizes that it would be better to switch to a different path.
And you know what? That is a theme of the experience.
There you go. Do you like how we... No one listening thought we were going to stick this landing, and we stuck it, baby.
We stuck this landing because path dependence is definitely a thing in the Expanse. Like an original decision that's made, and then no matter what happens that shows that original decision to be a disastrous one, you're stuck on that path, and you have to play it out. Which I want to end on the most important thing in the episode. It's what the episode ends with.
The Big Bang.
We talked a little about it. I guess I just wanted to do some final thoughts about it, which is final thoughts about the Earth, because the Earth is going to be final.
So I guess this is where you've read the books, and I can tell in the books what happens. I guess they've changed some things in the show. For example, I know for a fact that apparently in the books, it's Marco that kidnaps Naomi in this, whereas they decide to make it Philip, which I like that choice. I guess my question is this a deep impact? In other words, is this Earth being, is this an extinction level event, or is it a not quite extinction level event? That is the part that I'm going to want to know. And literally, I might very well watch this episode the moment we stop recording this, because that is what is haunting me.
Should we restart? Because I did sort of hint that it's final days for the Earth. Let's do a little bit of tape in there. Okay. And we can kind of start to do, you know what? Let's pick it up with what I have as the outro.
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay. So I think we've covered all the major themes and some themes that aren't so major, but we've figured out how to make them major. Final thoughts, Dan. As a non-reader of the series especially, maybe you can speak to curiosities, expectations.
So as a non-reader of the books, as I said, I very much want to watch the next episode almost immediately. It's clear Earth is in trouble. What I don't know is just how much trouble is it in. In other words, is this something that will literally... Is Marco's plot something that will intentionally or unintentionally lead to a truly extinction level event, or is it just a really, really... Is it just like a deep impact kind of thing?
Is it just really, really bad?
Yeah. It's a quasi-extinction level.
A fine distinction to make. Yeah, I mean, they could do something different.
Right, I get...
I don't think it's spoiling anything to play out this particular thought / question, which is, what happens when Earth is not home.
Yes. So let's put it this way. If this is something we will obviously be talking about, I'm sure, in future episodes, but the effect on the distribution of power if Earth is no longer Earth is going to be it's going to be interesting. And also, I guess the question is,
and I would love to know, start thinking of historical parallels, because
I will work on it for next week. Yes, for the next episode.
None of them occur to me. I will also point out again, not a spoiler, refugee problem.
Yes. Also, I'm assuming like Luna suddenly, I assume, becomes much more important. That there's a lot of different ways I can play this out. None of them are good. So the Expanse is going to have a lot of plot-heavy content, I'm assuming, going forward.
And that I'll speak to a little bit as a reader of the series, just looking at how they're going to handle stuff. We now have two big bads. Marco / asteroid stuff, right? Osama bin Laden magnified to the nth degree.
A truly successful Osama bin Laden.
Yes. And then the proto-molecule, which has been MacGuffin / Big Bad up till now.
Right. So I will say this. There was a part of me that wondered, is the Marco faction involved in the proto-molecule stuff as well? Although the way that Babbage was asking questions leads me to think that there might be something else going on there. The problem, I think, right now is that as an Earther, I find the first plot and first big bad to be far more proximate than the proto-molecule. I know the proto-molecule is bad. I'm not saying that I don't understand the threat posed by the proto-molecule, but frankly, who gives a fuck? The Earth is about to be destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem that I foresee them having to navigate, and they've navigated a lot of stuff successfully, but I'm curious about how they do it, which is the emotional resonance of the Earth being destroyed for a bunch of Earthlings watching.
This is going to be an intense thing. It's going to be an intense arc.
Intense. And it was intense in the book. Like, I told you I was surprised they went ahead with it. I was impressed with the level of detail that they thought about in terms of the logistics of something that's even just a near extinction event. So that I'm curious about. I've already given hints about how much I'm looking forward to the Naomi plot being fleshed out and visualized.
And the Amos plot. I want to know where
exciting.
The hell Amos is. Because
yeah. There's a lot of really good stuff. And they've also started to pull from the novellas. And I read the novellas when I was really sick a year ago or so ago. So I kind of have fever dream memories of them. I should probably reread them. I know that the proto-molecule plot, with that scientist that they identify in the footage that Monica has, that's a novella plot.
So we will see how they all interact.
All right. I think we have covered everything. And again, I think we've got it under an hour, which I hope we have not tried anyone's patience. And we have given you some insight on both, big deal emotional themes and some of the, real world applicable political science bullshit. I haven't cursed enough on this episode, so I had to get that in.
So goodbye, a belated Happy Life Day to those Wookiees who celebrate it. You can find us on Twitter or Instagram or Patreon, which, thanks to Anna, I now know how to pronounce. Until next time.